Do you like adventure? How about romance? Comedy? There are a bunch of different ways to tell a story, but a good story usually follows simple principles known as story structure. Before getting into the actual structure of a story, we need to look at what drives a story. Story values. Story values are qualities of experience that shift between positive and negative. Some examples of these values include life and death, good and evil, broken and whole. You see, a story works like a line. You start at the beginning, travel along the path, and reach the end. But if a story actually worked like this path, it would not be interesting or entertaining. Realistically, a story looks more like a mountain range, and that is all thanks to story value. The values in a story are always changing and shifting. This is what provides the story's excitement. The story itself starts with one value and ends irreversibly and absolutely with its opposite. However, there are more parts of the structure. Just inside of the full story are the acts. The acts have major value changes and are what result in the biggest shape changes in this mountain. A three-act story is the most common, usually defined as the beginning, middle, and end. However, this isn't always the case. Based on the need of major value changes, there could easily be 4 or 5 acts. However, the value changes do not stop there. An act is comprised of sequences that have moderate value changes. A sequence is a section focused on one topic. This topic of the sequence is spread out between scenes. A scene has minor value changes. There are generally about 40 scenes in a theatrical performance. A movie usually has between 40 and 60, and a novel has more than 60 scenes. A scene is usually defined by changes in location or time. And at the bottom of the barrel are the beats. The main purpose of the beats is to keep the scene going by adding action and reaction between characters and situations. To get an idea of how story structure works, I took a look at one of my favorite movies, The Gamer's Dorkness Rising. This movie is about a group of gamers who are having a hard time with their tabletop game. It's a fun little comedy from 2008 by Dead Gentleman Productions. It's a 3-act story. For the sake of keeping things fairly spoiler-free, I'm just going to say that the first act ended with a hopeful outlook that the game experience was going to get better. Probably the biggest value change that represents the movie is bad game to good game. Now I'm going to zoom into the second act, which is made up of about 9 sequences. We're going to focus in on the sequence just after the middle of the movie. This sequence starts out at a value of mistrust, with stiff and tense gameplay, and ends with teamwork and a relaxed playstyle. In this sequence, the players start off being stolen from by a peasant. The players decided they don't like what Lodge, the storyteller, is doing and take things into their own hands. Lodge wasn't happy about this. In the next scene, half the group investigates the nearby town to discover a death demon. The group is captured, and one of them is taken control of because...
Since we're playing by the rules, I know you don't mind.
Oh, shut up, Kevin.
In the next scene, the rest of the group enter the town. They fight a horde of zombies. They win by using clever ideas that they wouldn't have used at the beginning of the sequence, because they were all too high-strung. As for examining the beats, I gotta say, the beats were tough to figure out at first. When I started the movie and was looking for each beat, it felt like I was driving a clutch car for the first time. When do I switch from gear 1 beat to gear 2 beat? By the end of the movie, I started getting used to where a beat started and ended. Basically, a beat is a section in a scene where the topic or mood is about one thing. When the topic or mood changes is the indication that a new beat has started. That was quite an ordeal, trying to find every beat in the movie, but it was very informative. Using this information, I decided to practice. I created a mock story simply based on story structure. I started big. My story would be about Pandora's box. I chose this topic because it's a story charged with emotional story value, and can be clearly defined, seen as the first stuff released from the box is despair in the world, and hope was left inside. So there are my clearly defined value changes for the story. It starts with despair and ends with hope. Alright, now I need some acts. I chose a 3-act story. The beginning to establish the world starting with despair and ending with stagnation. The second act, for the adventure of growth, ending in the climax, would take us from the despair of the end of the first act to relief at the end of the second act. The third act is traditionally the wrap-up of the story, so we go from relief at completing the challenge of the climax to irreversible hope for the world at the end of the story. Now, for some more practice, I'm going to include some sequences with value changes. It's looking a bit cluttered, so to keep it simple, I'm just going to include scenes for one sequence in the third act. To keep things interesting, I'll put these scenes right at the climax. So this sequence goes on a transition from determination to hope, so the first scene will start with determination. And since we're focusing closer into the nitty-gritty story, I'll make a main character by the name of Jack. After facing the trials of the story, Jack is now feeling determination for getting hope out of Pandora's box. So the first scene of this sequence will be Jack entering the area where the box is, but he's being held back and time is running short. We end the first scene with the story value at desperate. Jack enters the next scene only in the nick of time. His allies then appear and help him get through to the beginning of the next scene. This has brought us back to determination. For the last scene, I practice creating story beats. Jack rushes to the box and opens it. The box is completely empty. The enemy explains that hope had been let out long ago, but because the world was still falling apart, they assumed hope was still in the box. Jack then remembers events from the story in flashback. Jack talks to the enemy and tells him there is something no one planned. The box hope is in is the human heart, and we can all unlock it if we so choose. Jack is able to defeat the enemy using hope. The scene, sequence, and act end in relief. And those are some examples of the use of story structure. But of course, this is only my opinion, and you can leave yours in the comments below. How do you use story structure? Is there anything you do differently? And what other parts of storytelling should get covered?